And what we're going to do is introduce you to this new project that is being created in collaboration between Acme, Project Censored, and the Media Literacy and Digital Culture Graduate Program here at SHU.
Are you shooting there?
Yeah.
And it's called the Global Critical Media Literacy Project. And we have people here representing each one of those organizations. We have Nolan Higdon representing this big project, GCMLP. We have Mickey Huff from Project Censored. We have Julie Frechette, co-president of ACME. You know who I am, from the Media Literacy and Digital Culture Program here at SHU. And we're just going to kind of tell you what this is all about and get you on board with what we're trying to do, what the goals are, how it originated, and what we hope to accomplish. So I'm going to turn it over to Nolan first.
Cool. And I'll go ahead and I'll use the mic, and we'll pass it around as well. Help out with Colleen, our wonderful camera person over there. So as Bill said, my name is Nolan Higdon. I'm the coordinator for the GCMLP. That's the Global Critical Media Literacy Project. I left a couple of our packets in the tables. There's more up here if you want to look through them. Rob, you're walking around. You can hand out packets if someone needs them, right? Fun. Power. Networking. I'm also a board member of, I'm going to keep promoting it. I'm also a board member of ACME and the Media Freedom Foundation. And I teach English and history in the San Francisco Bay Area. So on paper, I look really good. Only on paper, though.
Radio, too.
Radio, too, yeah. So I'm here to discuss the Global Critical Media Literacy Project and what it means to be a social justice educator. And we'll open this up to dialogue because there's a lot of room to define these terms. And in the most broad sense, the GCMLP seeks to teach students how to navigate, evaluate, and participate in our 21st century global society. We want to help produce educators that provide a critical perspective on media education by providing them with resources. That's again what this packet is about. And you can get a free copy of this packet in PDF form at GCML.org. And so the GCMLP operates through a service learning program. So in the classroom, faculty and students work together to create content for the public to consume. And this content seeks to challenge narratives that are adopted by the mainstream by offering student perspectives. It also allows us to put global problems in both local and global context. The GCMLP service learning program is, you threw me off there, is based on the 40-year service learning program of Project Censored. Project Censored is celebrating its 40th anniversary. It's great to have the director, Mickey Huff, out here. Also, a lot of the pedagogical work that ACME has done. And the GCMLP sees itself as part of a larger solution to contemporary problems dealing with the flow of information. The GCMLP argues that rather than lobbying the FCC to promote regulation, we should create an alternative way for citizens to receive their information and the way they consume it. So GCML.org operates to provide news and news analysis or media analysis. It'll officially launch in fall of 2016. We're holding a Media Freedom Summit there at Sonoma State University for the official launch. There's flyers for that on your tables, as well as a bunch of other propaganda. One good thing about studying propaganda this long, we know how to make it. Oh yeah, and the Flex Your Media Muscle pamphlet as well. So the GCMLP, we consider it a social justice oriented form of pedagogy. And what does that mean? We believe that social justice educators recognize that there's inequities in society, and they believe that it's up to educators and educational institutions to remedy those inequalities. So a very Deweyan model, seeing the classroom as a laboratory for social experimentation. We focus a lot of our exercises on dealing with the majority of the generation in our classrooms, this millennials generation as they're called. And They're a generation, we argue, that are mistakenly known as sort of checked out of the society. It's interesting to always hear that, though, because it's so easy to look out your window and disprove this. If you look at things like the democracy spring, which is going on right now today, you could Occupy, Dreamers, Black Lives Matter, the environmental movement. We could go down the list of these millennial movements. But where I think some of these millennial efforts fall short, where the GCMLP hopes to sort of intervene or help strengthen these youth movements, is providing some civic engagement for students, not just tell them to recognize democracy or be able to define it, but learn how to actually participate in it. So, for example, I always tell my students that voting does little if you think all you're going to do is vote. You should vote for the person you hope to agitate, annoy, and protest until they do what you want. It's like picking a significant other. And you got to remember that only or about 20% of high schools in the United States actually mandate civics as a graduation requirement. So when we have a generation, even if we mistakenly perceive them as checked out, if they were checked out, you really have to blame a lot of the institutions that produce them, not the students themselves. Furthermore, as we've heard, I'm sure, from nearly every presentation, the U.S. is unique, that for the last 35 years, most nations have put some sort of media literacy education into their schools. The U.S. Still has not mandated that as part of its education. So again, if these students are sort of checked out, it may be that these institutions are not preparing them to participate in the society. And if you're watching the presidential primary, you can see what checked out non-critical thinking leads to. So the bottom line is our education system is not preparing students to navigate, evaluate, and participate in the 21st century global society. And getting caught up in my own rhetoric here. These students who are coming out of these schools are operating in this sort of neoliberal designed market that is where success is defined as having access to these tools because you're able to accumulate wealth. This is extremely problematic, not only because we don't teach media education, we don't teach media from a critical perspective, and furthermore, we have that digital divide that we brought up as well. A lot of these education talks sort of talk as if every single kid in America is holding these devices. That's simply not the case. There's a lot of individuals, especially from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, majority of which people of color, who do not have access to these tools. So they're left out of participating in this larger conversation when we talk about media. This neoliberal economic model with the growth of this digital society has seen two interesting shifts that we point to, and I think it's important for a social justice educator to acknowledge as well. One is we've seen this economic shift here in the United States, this service economy, where it's increasingly important to have an education just to attain some sort of economic success. Success is always in air quotes. At the same time, you have this rise in tuition. It's more difficult to get into college. It's a bigger gamble. And so you do have this white working class that's losing some of this one-time economic strength that they had in previous generations. At the same time, you have this demographic shift as well in race. People of color are increasing in the population overall, yet our K-12 institutions and higher education institutions continue to fail these students. To give you an idea, the average graduation rate of our high schools is 78% of students, which is embarrassing enough. But if you look at African Americans and Latinos, those numbers are in the 60% to 70%. So students are not graduating high schools. As high schools are not giving these students the tools they need to participate in the society. And educators have long talked about this achievement gap and how it contributes to this opportunity gap. So the achievement gap being the success, again, in schools. The opportunity gap being who has access to opportunity in the society. And we think the digital divide plays a major role in this. So having access to these tools could be part of the solution. However, it's not the only part of the solution. Because having access to tools is unlikely to produce agency. Agency is only exercised when people are literate with these tools. Gloria Ladson-Williams reminds us that the United States established a relationship and the inextricable link between literacy and power early in its history by outlawing reading and writing to enslaved African Americans. And there's a long history of literacy being used to provide a space of agency for students to empower themselves and change the society. So we think that educators need to recognize these inequities, teach these inequities to students. A recent poll came out that said 60% of millennials no longer believe race is a blockade to economic success in the United States. On the one hand, there's an impulse to blame the student, but again, the institutions producing students to believe that race is no longer a blockade to economic success is quite astounding. Furthermore, though, the GCMLP believes we cannot just point to inequities. We must also offer solutions, empower students to test and implement these solutions, get students civically engaged, and promote this social justice agenda, which is, again, focused on implementing these solutions to address direct inequities. So the GCMLP wants to focus on making a much more inclusive 21st century global society through an education that teaches students not only how to use these digital tools, but also to be critical of these digital tools. Even the little media education that does exist here in the United States is often slanted toward a very sort of scary corporate agenda. Microsoft and Sony, Apple and others have these educator resources that generally focus on dependence upon these tools rather than sort of critiques of the dangers of these tools. And as a result, these educator packets from corporations rarely offer some of these deeper critical conversations that I think media educators should have. The inequitable labor practices is a major one. We heard about, of course, Foxconn with Sony and Microsoft and Nickelodeon, where workers in China are jumping, committing suicide for the hours they work. Children in Korea had to, as part of their high school graduation, work overnight to produce the last iPhone. Environmental degradation is a big one too. This is a giant question. We're in this plugged-in society. When we're promoting to close the digital divide by putting these devices in more people's hands, what's e-waste going to do? The amount of energy consumption are large questions. Furthermore, the corporate media education also blockades us from discussing other possibilities for these tools. The open software movement, for example, I think is amazing, where students are designing these different pieces of software and making them free to the public. The corporate model doesn't like this, but the open software movement is big. It's trying to provide students with things they may not otherwise be able to afford. The critical perspective also allows us to get into conversations about, I think, what millennials are doing now to undermine the music, movie, and television industries' cultural hegemony on our arts is very interesting. This download culture is bankrupting at a very fast rate. I'll wipe the smile off my face.
Oh no!
Also, something Nikki's going to talk about too is corporate media does act as a propaganda arm for a lot of those who control our institutions. And a critical perspective in the classroom would allow us to discuss that. The corporate media education model does not. And a plethora of studies have confirmed that corporate media strengthens inequalities by marginalizing individuals through racist, classist, sexist portrayals. So in conclusion, I'd say that the GCMLP hopes to bring in these larger discussions and this more nuanced view of media education. It also seeks to address the problems where we see them. So one of the benefits, I think, of the GCMLP is it tries to be malleable to the society we're dealing with, to the group we're dealing with, the student we're dealing with, etc. I think that's a major plus. I'm going to pass it off to Mickey, but you can check out more at gcml.org.
Hi everybody, my name is Mickey Huff. I'm a professor of social science and history at Diablo Valley College, where I co-chair the history department. I've been involved in various capacities with Project Censored over the last decade. I've been director for 6 years now. I was associate director prior to that. And I teach courses on political economy, critical thinking. I'm very interested in historical narrative creation, the role of media and journalism in those types of interpretations. And so that's sort of how I've segued into working with Project Censored and the Media Freedom Foundation, the nonprofit that oversees our work. But before I continue, I wanted to thank everybody at Sacred Heart University, Bill, Lori, all the students that made this happen. I want to thank Rob, Julie, all the board, and everybody at ACME. This is a fantastic gathering, and I'm very glad to be here. Project Censored is honored to partner with our friends and work on this Global Critical Media Literacy Project, which is what we did last summer while we were finishing our annual book, Censored 2016, Media Freedom on the Line. We also finished this media resource guide. It was an educator resource guide, the Global Critical Media Literacy Project, and there's a lot of really great information in here and templates, and I would love to talk with more of you and have contact with you and have you email ideas and contributions. That's really what this is about. It's a collaborative effort, and I think everybody here has a lot to contribute, and we would be, again, honored if we could share more and we could work more toward these common goals of creating a more media literate culture. So please definitely check out GCML.org, projectcensored.org, and you have the announcements on all of your tables. We'd love to see you in October at the Media Freedom Summit to celebrate our 40th anniversary. So Project Censored has been around for 40 years. So many of you in the room may know or have been affiliated with in some capacity Project Censored before. For those of you perhaps not, the founder of Project Censored, Carl Jensen, was a former newspaper person, and he got into academia and communications and social communications, and he started this project based on a question surrounding the 1972 Nixon election, and he considered himself pretty media savvy, and he looked back at the 72 election and asked, how did Nixon win in such a landslide given Watergate? Because the independent or alternative news media publications, not the corporate news media, they had been reporting about these shenanigans, and not to downplay that, because Nixon was doing a lot worse that didn't seem to get him sunk either. However, Jensen looked back and said, well, how did the corporate media fail? Well, one argument is they didn't fail, they did their job to protect democracy. But the other is that, but this is the genesis of Project Censored. So he had his students go back and research this, and this is back in the day before Wi-Fi and internet and all that. So we literally, not we, 1976, I was 5, so I wasn't doing this yet, but I was getting there. But he had his class go and research all these independent journals and magazines and news publications and find out what are they covering and what then isn't in the corporate news or on the networks. I mean, that's all there were at the time, the networks, newspapers, and of course the news magazines and so forth. So he was thinking, well, what else is going on? So that's how the project began. And Carl passed away last year. He was 85. He was pretty active on our board up until a few years ago. And I just wanted to take a second so we dedicated the book to him this past year. And Carl was really an amazing person. He was a self-described optimist by birth, a tireless champion for bonds between freedom of expression and democracy. And he promoted critical media literacy and the training of ethical journalists as ways to cultivate more muckrakers and fewer buckrakers. That's one of my favorite taglines from Carl. And he taught investigative journalism as a way to solve problems and improve people's lives. And 40 years later, I'm honored to be the third director of the project following Carl and Dr. Peter Phillips. I work with Dr. Peter Phillips, who's president of the Media Freedom Foundation, and my associate, Dr. Annie Lee Roth. We put together these books every year now, so we still, 7 Stories Press in New York publishes our book every year. They're phenomenal publishers, a small independent publishing house, and they work with us basically between now and July. I disappear with Andy, and we put all of this together, but it's an amazingly collaborative effort. I mean, some 200 stories that we review every year and validate. I'll talk about that in a moment. We have people working with us on over 20 campuses. So we literally work with all, it's really a collective effort. You know, I'm a sort of director, figurehead, cat herder of the project. But that's really the nature of it, which is what led us to, again, reach out to our friends and say, well, we're all doing these things, and we need to reduce the redundancies and grow and build what we're all doing. And again, that's why, again, I'm very delighted to be here talking to all of you right now. So Project Censored, of course, has grown over the years in a lot of ways. This is as part of what we got into last night, and Bill, you brought this up during one of the talk last night, was, and Nicholas Johnson, former FCC commissioner, has been a Project Censored judge since 1976. He wrote the foreword for our book and wrote a really nice tribute to Carl. He worked with him for 40 years. But Nicholas Johnson is somebody that you may remember from Second Priority, right? So, because this is something that we run into all the time, particularly in the intersections of activist and academic circles. Everybody has their issue and their thing that's always the most important thing to them. But Nicholas Johnson reminds us that unless media and changing the way we interface with media and create media and produce citizen journalism and so forth, unless we change that and make that our second priority, we're likely to gain little ground in whatever our primary concerns are. So critical media literacy is for everyone. And the fact that it's not part of our educational program and curriculum in high school or K-12 it's absolutely a disgrace. It's failing us as a society, and it's failing young generations of people. And this is why we're doing it. We're not waiting for the Common Core 2.0. We do this already. And so what we're trying to do is help educate people how they can learn more about critical media education. And I mean, just this morning I saw an article, I think it was on HuffPost, that was saying, should we teach critical thinking to our students? And I'm like checking to see, is it the Onion? And I teach critical thinking, and it was sort of like, the title was more specific. It was, should we teach students about fallacies? Should we teach them how to detect logical informal fallacies? Right? And so the title just jumped in my face because that's the first thing I do in every one of my classes. Right? I teach people how to be bullshit detectors. That's what it is, right? That's really what it is. And critical media literacy that's a crass way to put it, of course, but that's at the root there, right? Teaching people how to ask the right kinds of questions. Not telling people what to think, but helping people learn how to develop their own thinking skills, right? The great feminist anarchist Deborah Goldman once said that the most unpardonable sin in society is independence of thought. I am a sinner, and I know you are too in that regard. And so again, this is what our mission is, and this is what we're really trying to push. Joel Simon, some of you may know the Committee to Protect Journalists. In his recent book, he writes about, I'll read just this quick passage. In Project Censored, we don't use the term mainstream media. It's absolutely irritating to me. Every time I hear it, it's like fingernails on chalkboard. Right? There's nothing mainstream about 6 corporations that control 90% of the content people get to hear, read, see, etc. That is a mouthpiece for the plutocracy. It has nothing to do with the people's media. So if you find yourself slipping into the mainstream rhetoric, try to catch yourself and remind what you're really talking about is the corporate, top-down, managed news propaganda. And it's not just corporate, it's deep state. It's State Department, it's CIA, it's DOD, right? They've had message creators in these divisions and parts of government for decades and decades and decades, and they still do it. And so this is why this is part of being critically media literate, is understanding who's making the messages and how do they go out and what messages don't go out, right? But Simon, he talks about a networked fourth estate, right? And so by contrast to the corporate model, independent journalists and news reporting organizations, ones that Project Censored celebrates every year since 1976, they're now best understood as vital components of what experts identify as a newly developing networked fourth estate. Again, this is how Joel Simon put it. As technology makes it easier for individuals and smaller outlets to gather and distribute information, power will continue to shift away from the larger media organizations that were once dominant, right? And this is why we need to also work with millennial generations and young people, and we need to bring them into this. And by the way, I don't mean bring in a condescending way. We need to bring, shepherd, and follow their leads. Yeah. What are their stories? Where do they tell stories, right? I mean, some of you may be familiar with this dynamic, and I'm in Northern California, and been an activist for a very long time. I grew up in a working class family in Western Pennsylvania, so when I escaped and found my way to Berkeley, I felt like I was reborn in some ways. But I never forgot my working class background and roots. And I realized that a lot of people that are in activist circles, there are generations, of course, of people that have been in activist circles, and they oft lament that, well, where are the younger people? Why don't they come to this event? Or why didn't they come to this speaker? Or why didn't they do this? And I say, well, it's because they don't, they don't hang out at the Unitarian Church. Yeah, I'm not knocking that. The Unitarian halls have hosted many things forever. Great places to do things. But I say, like, and again, this is the running joke in Berkeley for sure, is you go to these kind of activist events and civic events and so forth, and again, not knocking this at all, but it's gray hairs as far as the eye can see, right? And I'll come in with students, right, and it's all just sort of like, whoa, yeah, young people, bring more of them, right? And of course we do, because we think that the generations should all be merging, it should be fluid, right? But what I always ask these people, quite respectfully, because people have decades of experience and knowledge and so forth, I say, like, do you ever go out and find out where they're doing things, right? And I said, maybe they don't do it on the street corner or the town square. I'm like, have you heard of Twitter? Have you heard of Facebook? And again, I have high levels of criticism for these social media outlets, but they are also useful, and many of us work in them, right? And do network in them. And so, a lot of what we're doing at Project Censored too is trying to work with differing generations, right? I'm not the younger generation anymore, right? And Peter Phillips, who's nearing 70, he's not either, right? Andy is about the same age I am. We're in our mid-late 40s. But we are privileged to work with so many young people. And I work at a junior college, Diablo Valley College, just out of Berkeley, with 28,000 students, right? It's a very diverse group of people. And ages, but it's still a lot of young people, right? And so this is where we're trying to really target the message and also listen to messages of what these folks are doing and what they want to do. So let me tell you just a little bit about what we're doing at Project Censored, and please hear this as a potential an invitation. If you are interested in being affiliated and doing some of the work I'm going to talk about right now, if you think the things that you're already doing very easily blend into what we do with the Critical Media Literacy Project, that's what we want. We want grassroots, bottom-up people contributing, doing things, and we want to support what you're doing as a group and collective effort. And so this is an invitation. What we do and what we're known for, in part, is our top 25 censored stories list. And we do this through a process called validated independent news research. And so students go out and find stories, or we help them find stories to research sometimes if they don't always know. But a big part of that is, what are corporate media sources? What are independent sources? And independent doesn't mean neutral, objective. I mean, objectivity bias is a big problem, the myth of objectivity. So we try to teach people how to understand the angles of the various media outlets and independent publications so they can kind of get an idea of, well, what's the angle here? And then we take the same story and say, well, what's the angle over there on the same topic, right? So we're doing this kind of real time in classrooms, and I did this yesterday with Bill and News Bias in the panel that we did yesterday. Bill was kind enough to invite us in to have that conversation. But during the validated independent news process, we're taking independent stories. The students go and they look and they research to try to retell the story and help fact check the story with professors and others. And then they use LexisNexis or ProQuest or other databases to find out, where else is this story covered? Who's covering this story? And much of the time what we find is corporate media is not covering a lot of these important stories, many around the topics that Nolan was discussing. Race, class, gender, inequality, diversity. We see it in the corporate media, but then when we do see it, we see it in a certain packaged way. So the fact that something has been covered in corporate media doesn't disqualify it from being what we call a censored story. What's censorship? At Project Censored since 1976, censorship is anything that interferes with the free flow of information, right? Anything that interferes with the free flow of information in a society that purports to have free speech and free press principles. And that's the definition we've used. And we also work, by the way, we're affiliated with Banned Books Week, National Coalition Against Censorship. We're one of the sponsors of National Whistleblower Summit in Washington, D.C. every year. We're not just interested in this one little niche of censorship. We think censorship is a problem all over the place. And so we try to do what we can to fight censorship and support media freedom efforts. And VINS, this top censored story list, we have a whole list of national judges. We've got professors and students across the country researching these stories. And then they write it up, they see where it's covered. If it's covered in the corporate media, how? That's the next step. How is it covered there? And then the students start looking and say, well, they did cover topic X, but they left out this context. They left out all these other parts of it, right? So at Project Censored, we would say, well, that's a partially censored story. Anything other than the desire to tell the full story is a problem. And so we are trying to get students to understand these issues, and then they're contributing to it. And then we highlight not only the independent journalists, right, the intrepid, fearless, independent journalists that have the courage to tell the stories that others won't tell. And sometimes people maybe can't tell, right? There's a lot of people in corporate media that know this stuff, but they feel like they can't tell the story or they won't have a job, right? So we don't, I mean, yes, we're critical of corporate media, but we're not bashing the corporate media journalists that understand this, right? We all can bash some of the corporate media journalists, and we know who they are, that do the top-down propaganda. But we're trying again to create more of a media literate society. So in addition to the top 25 that gets vetted and researched and judges go over and look at it, we end up with our top 10 stories, our top 25 stories every year. We also do what's called deja vu. So we actually go back and look at select stories. Well, what happened to that story from before? Is it still censored? Is it still underreported? Who's talking about that? And we celebrate when corporate media pick up a story and say, look, they can do it. They just won't. Right? And so we are careful to try to make sure that when we see these things happen in corporate media that do good things, where people are doing good work, we want to celebrate that. But we also want to celebrate the independent journalists and then the students that research the story, and we think it's a bringing it to light again, right, of that story. So we want to celebrate that, and then the deja vu is bringing it to light again, right? It's deja vu all over again. And because we're trying to say, look, if these stories aren't getting picked up, they apparently need to be retold. And they need to be retold until people start to hear them. And then when people start to understand and know what's going on around them, then they can exercise civic action. Then they can spring to action. Then they can do things that make meaningful change, their communities and their lives and the lives of other people around them. So we also cover, of course, what corporate media do, which is, well, junk food news. Right? Carl coined that term in 1984, and news abuse is a kind of propaganda. And Carl did that, and we continue that, and unfortunately, that could be the whole book. What is corporate media doing instead of covering actual news? Well, it's junk food news, whether it's the Kardashians or O.J. Simpson was always in and out of there, with Kanye West, who's interrupting tomorrow. These kind of things are really distracting. So these are distractions. But we highlight those, and then what we do is we go in and say, well, what else could you have been covering if you weren't covering junk? Right? So we know that time isn't a problem in the 24/7 news cycle anymore. It's a choice they don't want to cover. We highlight media democracy in action. We highlight groups that do these kinds of things. And every year in the book, we have organizations that talk about how they do these things. And we want to encourage civic engagement, and we want to encourage critical media literacy. And we love to continue to do that I wish we didn't have to do it. Honestly, it would be awesome if it would not be Project Censored, because that would mean we actually had a functioning free press system that was widely accessible and diverse, right? We do have that with technology. We do have that in the internet, but we have to find it, and we have to use it, and we have to turn off corporate media and stop, basing what we do in our lives on whether or not something's covered in CNN. By the way, 1,000 people protesting in LA at CNN office for the blackout of the Bernie Sanders rally, right? I mean, we could go on and on with examples, but the point is that we are winning. The corporate news media is becoming increasingly irrelevant. If you look at the Pew studies and how people are turning it off, and a younger generation of people aren't watching TV. They're on the gadgets and the devices in this country and around the world, and they're more and more being part of the media. And that's what we want to encourage, and we hope that you may do that with us. So thanks very much.
These are very tough acts to follow. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julie Frechette. I am Chair and Professor of Communication at Worcester State University. It's spelled like Worcester, but it's Worcester. And that is Central Massachusetts. So it's a pleasure to be here today with such great company and friends. I'll be plugging my book. So Rob Williams and I are the co-presidents of the Action Coalition for Media Education. And right, we have a lot of people, 20 contributors, many of whom are here, who worked with us to produce a book called Media Education for a Digital Generation. And we'll be talking actually about the book and its evolution, the different ideas within it that are represented this afternoon at 4:45. So that's a conversation we'll have then, and we hope that you'll be here for that. But I wanted to tell you that what I teach is media studies, I teach media criticism, I teach gender and media, political economy, and I've been doing this for about 25 years now. And I also worked with folks to do some service learning components related to media literacy education. So I worked with a colleague and we created the very first multimedia clubhouse for the Worcester area, which is the second largest city in all of New England, a very large area. And we worked with the Boys and Girls Club to get a grant and get some Mac computers, get about 15 of them, and to teach young people in the community to use iMovie and to use video cameras to represent and document the stories that were compelling for them in their communities that were not being reflected in the images that they saw, in the movies that they were watching, the television programs that they had reflecting their own communities. So it was really exciting. And so before I actually got to this point, I worked at the University of Massachusetts Amherst to create some training, an institute, a summer institute for media literacy education at a time when there weren't a lot of programs in the United States that were trying to train both educators and community activists to learn both the theory and production, and to take those tools and those models into their own communities, their own classrooms, to make a difference in the lives of young people. That really was a catalyst for the kind of work that it was important to me then and that I continue to do. But what I did in this kind of work is I followed not only what the teachers were doing during this 1 week of intensive training and the wonderful productions they did, but I followed them after they went back to their schools, and this became the subject of my master's thesis. And I wanted to see how they actually integrated media literacy education into their environments and communities. And the challenges are extremely complex. And all of the challenges that they had then are the same ones that we have now. And this is something we really need to ask ourselves in terms of our own institutional analysis. I think we need to better study and assess what it is that's keeping us from integrating media literacy education successfully into our K-12 and higher educational settings. And so I have some insights for that. Of course, we know that budgets are always tight. And when I say budgets are tight, I mean that they're linked and associated with things like healthcare costs that rise exponentially year after year, so that school districts are spending enormous amounts of their time figuring out how to then switch to a different healthcare provider, because when they do competitive bidding, they're offered a good rate, and then the following year, it can just double. And schools cannot even afford to keep the employees they have because of these healthcare costs. There are all sorts of other costs related to unfunded mandates that I think many people don't realize, that schools are being asked to do more and more, and it has to do with curricular development, it has to do with training young people to have job training skills, helping them with even things like how they socialize. So cyberbullying became something that schools are responsible for now in terms of legislation in Massachusetts, and other states have done this as well. But there's never any funding that's also accompanied by these different mandates. That's very challenging. I talked yesterday in our teacher training about how a lot of schools are encouraged to get on the technology bandwagon, but they don't necessarily have a plan for what to do with them. So I talked about how in our district, which is the largest regional school district in central Massachusetts where my children went, they spent millions of dollars on getting iPads into the high school, and yet they didn't have a curricular plan for how to integrate them well, and all of that money was wasted because the teachers were not given the proper training, and there were no learning objectives that really substantially enhanced the kind of learning that would foster a lot of creativity and production. So here we are now, and I've met up with so many of you at different conferences, and it's always nice to see people I haven't seen in some time, and to realize that we're all doing such great work, and yet the structures are working against us in terms of having the support that we need. But Rob and I, in particular, have seen each other at so many of these conferences that we figured it was time to celebrate the good work that we were doing along with our peer groups and friends that we've been able to collaborate with, And ACME is actually celebrating its 15th year anniversary. So it's a time when we're trying to engage in some new exciting collaborative work with others. And the GCMLP is one way in which to do so we're not duplicating our efforts, and to provide people with central places where they can convene and share resources. So again, when I do this kind of work, and I've been writing about media literacy education for some time now, about 15, 20 years, but I'm always presenting in Canada or in the UK. I was invited to go be part of an institute in Norway. These are the countries where they've figured out how to implement media literacy education successfully in their curricular models. And we have a lot of work that we need to do there. Unfortunately, here in the States, where we don't have a lot of funding and we don't have necessarily a lot of support from school districts that are strung out, we are all doing a lot of creative things, but we don't always pull them together or have centralized places to share these resources. So that is what ACME does. And if you go to our website, and I want to make sure I get it right, smartmediaeducation.net, you'll find that there are so many wonderful resources, and we've been able to use, with the good help of people who have put work into this, we've taken a lot of the resources and made them user-friendly, they're attractive visually, and now we're working with other groups, so with the GCMLP and with Project Censored, to try to then see what areas we have that overlap. And so all last summer, Nolan really spearheaded this initiative for the resource packet, but it is chock full of resources you can use in the classroom, example of activities that you might find fruitful, that you can adapt depending upon the age, level, or group or constituency that you're teaching and reaching out to. And it's available online. And moreover, a lot of times our students do great projects, but we don't always know sort of what do we do with the end result for what students have produced. How do we showcase that and share it with other people? We come to these conferences to see the fruitions of those efforts, but what's exciting is the GCMLP website now will house examples of good student work. So the students that I have in higher education, in media criticism, who are writing good critical papers, who are creating good effective blogs that are critiquing things like power, ideology, the basic embedded values that are overrepresented and skewed in corporate media, where they question hegemony and different roles that are out there, stereotyping and bias. All the fruitions of those efforts now, instead of just writing a paper for me, they're producing blogs and they're writing things that then get distributed through the GCMLP. And that's exciting. It really raises the bar for the learning activity and the outcomes. The students get really, I think they take the assignment more seriously when they know that other people will be reviewing their work and they'll have a place to publish. So I would say that I would like us to quickly focus on what the GCMLP does that's a little different than other organizations. And so, just like with ACME's goal, we're free of big media or corporately funded curricula or anything that would influence the pedagogical methods or the subjects and how you would approach teaching these things. It does also embrace activism. So we embrace that you do something with this knowledge. It's not enough just to learn these things at the lower tiers of Bloom's taxonomy, but you really have to take these things out in the real world and have some culminating activism that comes from it if it's going to be a memorable learning experience. And we also advocate for media reform. And I would say that when thinking about what unifies all of us here and what unifies the goals and objectives of our shared partnership is that we're interested in studying the interrelationships between media structures, so we understand who owns our media system, as well as who the desired target audiences are for the kinds of productions that are out there, and then how that determines the way the text, the narratives, the stories are told, and to look at what gets left out. And so it's important for us, what we do is we take on a multi-literacies approach. This is something that I've written about in the past and tried to refine as we have new tools and we have new architecture, if you will, because of the way that social media works, because of the way that mobile technology works. These are things we have to grapple with and understand better. So looking at media structures, looking at the grammar of different media, the syntax, how the medium itself changes or alters the message, how we should embrace the distributive networks that are out there, but be very wary about the algorithms that are used to narrowcast the information that's out there that we should have access to. I would also just quickly say that This is an exciting time to be involved in media literacy education despite all the challenges that we have, lack of resources. Many of us are trying to provide this and fill in the gaps with little funding, but we're achieving a lot. And so it's through these partnerships, I would encourage everybody to think about those who are here and to sustain relationships and to leverage in whatever way you wish the resources provided by this coalition of various organizations, and to think about the ways we can embrace becoming the media at a time when we really have a lot to say, focus on the humanistic objectives that are out there in light of ever-growing technology that keeps ending up in the hands of us at younger and younger ages. So thank you so very much. I'm pleased to have you all here. It's a pleasure. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but I'm heartened by all that you folks are doing, and I hope that you'll join us as well in leveraging the opportunities and partnerships that you propose.
So I'll be brief for a change. Some of my grad students who are here are thinking, when have you ever been brief, Houston? But the role of MLDC, the Media Literacy and Digital Culture Graduate Program here at SHU in this GCMLP, the Global Critical Literacy Project, when I first heard that Project Censored and ACME were coming together to form this new entity, I basically said, oh, me too, because I've been a dedicated fan of Project Censored for a long, long time. My first time on the ACME board was many years ago, and I admire what both of those organizations do so much. And it makes perfect sense for the orientation of this graduate program to be a part of this coalition that's being formed. In our graduate program, what we're thinking about is that there are hundreds and hundreds of students around the country who are taking courses with you. Right? They're taking courses at Wheelock with Susan.
What?
And they're taking courses with Bob Jensen. And they're taking courses with my friend Tom Gardner. And they're taking courses with one of my former teachers, Jack Banks. And they're taking courses with Julie Frechette. And they're taking courses with our keynote speaker tonight, Sut Jolly. And they're getting really turned on and really excited about this work. And then they graduate with a bachelor's degree. It's like, oh, what do I do now? I got all excited about this, but what now? We think that pursuing that education a little bit more is really, really important. Antonio Gramsci believed that it's very important for those who want to change the world to understand the world better than those who you are in opposition to. And we believe that by pursuing this education further, they can become organic intellectuals who can be the ones who understand that world better. We see our graduate program as unique in that it's a place that doesn't just do critical media analysis. We do that, but that it's also for people who want to change the world. There was a great author and thinker who once said that philosophers have previously only sought to understand the world, but the point is to change it. And that's what these organizations are about, and that's what our orientation here in our graduate program is about. So it was no question for me that uniting with ACME and PC to form this new entity was absolutely the right thing for this graduate program to do, to continue working with the students who are on board with that idea of transforming the world. And so what we have is with Project Censored, they work with lots of undergrad students who start doing this work and get really turned on to it. We have ACME, who has a mission of working with teachers who also get this and who want to do this kind of work. And if we bring those groups of people together and then they can pursue a master's degree here with us, we are helping to create this new group of people who can go out and do this work. I told Mickey the other day, just informally, like, this is the antithesis to the school to prison pipeline. Right? We hope this to be a pipeline from school to being active citizens who are out there transforming the world for the better. Those are the type of grad students that we're looking for. We're very lucky because those are the grad students that we got. They're sitting around this room this year, in the first year of the program, and we hope to pursue that further in the future, and uniting with Project Censored and ACME to form this global critical media literacy project, we believe is really going to do that. And it's going to do two things. It's going to help us find the people who want to do that kind of critical media work, and to then give them an outlet for the work that they're doing with you guys. So moving forward, we really hope that our students are going to be very, very involved in producing content and doing stuff with GCMLP. My current group of students are saying, well, wait a minute, we missed that opportunity. It's a new thing being formed. I didn't leave you out, we just didn't have it when we started with you guys. But the world is always transforming, and we're joining this, and we really have high hopes for being a part of this future. So I'm really pleased to be associated with these people.
I wanted to quickly add that what I'm hoping for being here in person is not just to continue to see and speak with many of you, but if Project Censored doesn't just do a book, but we're also now doing the GCMLP, and it's a contributor-based site, and the contributions come from you, from students, right? So this is, again, an invitation. Project Censored is also in its 5th year of the Project Censored show, which is on Pacific Radio out of Berkeley, California. We're on 35 stations, including several in Hartford, Connecticut. So it's a weekly program, and I would love to, at least if I don't get a chance and you don't get a chance to talk to me at any length, have a card, an email, anything, because I would like to have you on our show. I would like to have, we cover all kinds of issues, but we obviously also cover media literacy, even if it's that second priority, right? It's always part of what we do, and a big thing that I wanted to do here is make sure that you all know that there's an open invitation to be on our program. It does take some scheduling, we're only on 1 hour a week, but I want to hear from you. I would love to have you on the show. We have a new film that came out a couple years ago, Project Censored, the movie, Ending the Reign of Junk Food News. I have that and copies of our latest book. If you didn't get one with registration, there were different registrations, so not everybody got one of these with registration, but I have them at 50% off for conference price, so they're only $10 a piece. So if you want to get a copy of our new book, if you want to get a copy of our film, we're making another film that's based on what we're doing here. We're going around the country and videoing teachers and students, professors, people in the community that are actually doing media literacy activism, and we'd love to also be able to include you in that. So with that, I'll hand over.
We've only got a couple minutes, and then we've got to get you to our next round of panels, but we thought we could take just a couple minutes for just a couple questions.
And while you're formulating those, if you have not yet marked your calendar for the 3rd weekend of October at Sonoma State University, which I should point out is #wine country. We hope to see you all there. Do we have any quick observations, comments, questions? Henry, please.
Well, I'd like to speak up as one of those gray-haired kind of men and women in the audience, and I think we have to have a multi-generational approach, and so I want to think about how we can do that, and I'd like to put that on the agenda for development with the projects we just heard from. And this is the perfect place because of the teachers here, and as you said, Bill, all these people are working with young people, and there's lots of people like me that are veterans of public media, commercial media, and we want to meet our and work together with young folks too.
You know, there was a remarkable moment this morning. I had the privilege of roaming around to make sure that everything was working well and taking photos of all the sessions. And Rose Dyson and Henry Kroll acknowledged across the table in conversation that, yeah, we've been doing this for 30 years. Hi, Henry. Hi, Rose. It's really fantastic. And Henry does remind us, it's not just about our students, of course, but it's also multi-generational. So thank you, Henry. Other comments or questions? You're all eager to get on, aren't you? Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks,
we've
everyone.
got
Can we get one more round of applause
round of
for
panels.
these guys?
For time to